Good afternoon and very, very warm welcome to this meeting of the APPG for the Innovation Corridor on this really interesting and vital topic of inward investment. I'm Julie Marston. I'm the Member of Parliament for Hertford and Stortford and co-chair of the Innovation Corridor APPG. So a very warm welcome. You are very welcome here today. And I'm really delighted that we're focusing on such a highly important and relevant topic. Even before we were facing a global pandemic, inward investment is so critical to our national and of course our local economy and well-being. After post-pandemic, it's going to be even more important, particularly in the context of fierce global competition. So it's very timely and very important. Across our corridor, we have an amazing array of brilliant businesses, from startups who are disrupting industries to established pharmaceutical companies that have already built entire markets. The potential of the economic corridor is immense. And that's why we've been such a huge draw for inward investment in recent years, and why it's considered such a huge asset to the UK. But we are in uncertain times, and with economic uncertainty, we need to be even more certain about our place in the world, our place in our economy, and what we need to do to maintain our position and grow it even more. So I think I will just go over what we're going to do. I think we've got an agenda for today's meeting. We've got three fantastic speakers who I'm very, very pleased to be welcoming in a moment. And I think I'll introduce Glenn Crocker to start with, who is Head of Life Sciences at Jones Lang LaSalle. In that role, Glenn brings together the specialist skills of professionals at JLL to address major strategic and operational opportunities and challenges within the life sciences sector. So I'll hand over to Glenn.
Thank you, Julie. If we could have the slides, please. Very pleased to be here to talk about the Innovation Corridor. My role today is to really give you an overview, and inevitably I'm going to come at it from a life science perspective. But actually, for life sciences, you could probably read many of the other sectors. Life sciences is just really symptomatic of what's going on in the Innovation Corridor. So if we can move on to the first slide, please. Or the next slide. There we go, thank you. So the life science sector in the UK is growing incredibly rapidly. It's booming at the moment. It's driven by investment. So the amount of investment going into UK life science companies over the past decade has more than tripled. The last few years have been record years. 2021 already looks like it's going to be a record year for investment. And that in turn is also leading to a boom in startup companies. So across the UK as a whole, there have been more and more startup companies created, and these are being funded by that increase in investment. Now, on top of that, we've got structural shifts in the pharmaceutical industry as a whole. So the way that the large pharmaceutical companies are behaving and interacting with the smaller entrepreneurial businesses has been changing over a number of years. And it's sort of symptomatic of AstraZeneca's move to Cambridge to be at the heart of the life science sector in the UK, in fact, indeed in Europe. And that really led to the company establishing its operations that at a large scale. It already was based in Cambridge, but it's at a large scale within Cambridge so that it can interact with those centres of entrepreneurial excellence and academic excellence. And that's happening across the world. It's not just AstraZeneca. All the pharmaceutical companies are looking at how they can access that intellectual property and talent, and they want to be in locations where you can find it. So on to the next slide. So that's why the UK Innovation Corridor is in such a prime position to take advantage of that boom in the life science sector. There are three key nodes, really: Cambridge, Stevenage, and London. And these are real strengths in the UK, but particular strengths in the southeast of England. And over time, these are going to be the points that really develop the sector across the whole of the innovation corridor. And I'll go to each of these in turn to explain why that's the case. So on to Cambridge, first of all, the next slide. So Cambridge itself is a real hotbed for life sciences. It's probably the biggest centre for life sciences outside of the US. Again, investment is driving a lot of that growth. The university spin-outs are really taking off. So there's been a significant increase in the number of spin-outs from Cambridge University over the past few years. And that in part is driven by the availability of finance. I've mentioned AstraZeneca already. We've got Illumina, also based in Cambridge, and a number of other larger businesses on the back of the large number of smaller entrepreneurial companies. And these businesses are based often at the science parks in and around Cambridge. And a lot of them are in the area to the south of Cambridge, sort of spinning down the innovation corridor. And Cambridge market is getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and everybody wants to be part of that. And this is happening within the real estate sector as well. 4 or 5 years ago, the real estate sector barely noticed life science or science sector at all. Now, life sciences is the hot ticket at the moment, and that's demonstrated by a recent transaction at Cambridge Science Park, where there were a number of buildings on the park, 5 buildings on Cambridge Science Park that housed a number of life science companies that were put up for sale by L&G. Those were put up for sale for £60 million, and they ended up selling for 100 million. Such is the demand for space in Cambridge. And as a result of that, I think we're going to start to see more and more spill out from Cambridge, and that's going to head south towards Stevenage and towards King's Cross. So moving on to the next point in the node, Stevenage. So again, Stevenage, huge success story. GSK is based in Stevenage and has been for many, many years, but it's less than 10 years ago that the Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst was created. Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst is an incubator for life science companies, and that is filled up with really incredible startups that have grown very fast, raised large amounts of money. As you can see on this chart, the amount of investment that's gone into those companies in less than a decade is about 1.6 billion pounds so far. In fact, it's even more now because there's been more fundraising in 2021. The Stevenage Bioscience Catalyst has expanded and continues to expand. Then we've got the Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult, which has developed Stevenage as one of the leading centres for cell and gene therapy research and development outside of the US, in fact, one of the leading ones in the world. That itself is also expanding and developing, creating and enabling to grow a large number of companies in this cutting edge area of research. And the way that this is manifesting itself is in the example of Sycamore House, where there's a company called Cadans, which is a Dutch investor into life science real estate, and it's developing facilities for life science companies. That's come to Stevenage, and it's actually bought an old spaghetti factory and turning it into space for early stage and fast growing companies. And that hasn't quite been completed yet. It nearly is, but it's already 100% occupied. So that space is full, and Stevenage is going to continue to expand into its surrounding areas. And the next slide, finally, we'll look at London. At the other end of the railway line from Cambridge is King's Cross Station. It's about 45 minutes train ride. Stevenage is about 15 minutes train ride from London King's Cross. So you can see sort of distances we're talking about here. And London is actually now the fastest growing life science cluster in the UK. In fact, the fastest growing cluster in Europe. Investment has more than doubled over the past 5 years to over 700 million pounds a year in 2020. We've had the Crick Institute, the largest research institute of its kind in Europe, built at King's Cross. We have a lot of development going on in and around King's Cross. Most recently, MSD, the pharmaceutical company, announced that it was going to build a big development just opposite King's Cross Station and just a few minutes walk from the Crick. So a new hub is developing at King's Cross. There are a number of other developments that are being created there over the next sort of 5 years or so. And one of the things that's driving it is, of course, the investment going into the companies. The number of startups is increasing significantly, and employment, people employed in the life science sector, has increased significantly. Again, that has doubled over the last 5 years or so. And so that in itself is driving demand for space from companies, but it's also causing the spill out from London, again, up the corridor towards Stevenage and towards Cambridge. So on the next slide, you can see where we think the future lies. And again, just to reinforce the distance between Cambridge and King's Cross, it is hardly anything. It's not that far distant from the space between South San Francisco and San Jose in the Bay Area in Silicon Valley. So we're talking about an easily manageable distance which can be filled up effectively with high-tech, life science and entrepreneurial tech companies over the next decade or so. And we anticipate, if the growth continues in London and Cambridge over the next few years, we expect there'll be a need for about another 1 million square feet of space in the Cambridge area, another between 1 and 4 million square feet of space in London. And that can't all be accommodated within London and within Cambridge itself, so it must spill out. And as I say, the most logical place for it to expand into is along that corridor. And that really was all I wanted to say. So with that, I'll pass back to Julie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Glenn. That's really interesting and very visual as well, which is really interesting to see those sentences. And I love the fact that we've got a hot ticket, which is moving south. That's really interesting. Thank you very much. So I'd like to hand over to our next speaker, please, who is Andy Williams, who is Vice President of Cambridge Programme and Strategy at AstraZeneca. With the arrival of AstraZeneca's Strategic R&D Centre in Cambridge Biomedical Campus, Andy has been an active contributor to evolving Cambridge's thinking in areas such as transport, skills development, amenities for the community and affordable housing. So it's very apposite that you're here. Very big welcome to you, and I'll hand it over to you, Andy.
Wow, thanks, Julie. That's a big build-up. Was that from my CV? Thank you very much. So, hello, everyone. I've tried to avoid having PowerPoints. I think I'm tiring of that situation. I'll show you a video in a minute. But as Julie says, I work for AstraZeneca. Become quite famous in the last 12 to 18 months. We have about 70,000 employees all over the globe, actually. And we are a global pharmaceutical company. Within the UK, we spend just over £1 billion per year on R&D, which I think makes us the biggest R&D spender in the UK. And from our manufacturing plant in Macclesfield, we contribute about 1% of total UK exports. So prior to recent events, AstraZeneca were known for two things. One was being bought by another large American pharmaceutical company, which fortunately didn't happen. And secondly, by our decision to consolidate our R&D and global headquarters in Cambridge as one of our 3 global R&D hubs. When we announced that, it was an inward investment to an extent, although there was some reshuffling of people within the UK. I'm not sure that counts, for about 2,000 people. What's less well known is since that decision to move 2,000 people in 2013, we have since grown to 4,000 people in Cambridge. And I think that is a strong vindication of Cambridge and what it offered us and how we've taken advantage of that in bringing more of our global organisation to Cambridge. If we show the video now, and I'll come into what I think are some of our constraints and some of our opportunities moving forward. We have a quick 2-minute video. I've been told it couldn't be any longer than 2 minutes.
AstraZeneca is a global science-led biopharmaceutical company. With a major presence in the UK, we operate in more than 100 countries, and our innovative medicines are used by millions of patients worldwide. Our focus is on the treatment of diseases in 3 therapy areas: oncology, cardiovascular, renal and metabolism, and respiratory and immunology. Our presence in Cambridge is transformational for AstraZeneca and for patients. It is where, for the past 25 years, we have carried out biologics research and development. Within the groundbreaking health community of the Cambridge Biomedical Campus, we are building a world-class and vibrant research and development hub. Now let's explore this iconic building that has been designed to change the way scientists collaborate. The courtyard is a centerpiece connecting the external areas with massing inspired by the Cambridge colleges. The open architecture promotes integration and openness, which supports our collaborative approach to research across disciplines and with external partners. We are putting science on display. The sawtooth roof spans over 12,000 square meters, yet the building is just 3 stories high to fit aesthetically within its environment. Our R&D centre will be home to a wide range of leading scientific capabilities, enabling us to bring together our small molecule and biologics research capabilities. Our vision to provide a centralised destination for all of our Cambridge colleagues will continue to evolve over the next few years. Our master plan includes the construction of an office building, plus a travel hub and a vibrant amenities hub to feature a fitness and wellbeing centre, nursery and other facilities. Our data-driven travel plan maximises the use of public and sustainable transport modes, creating healthier options. We're excited about the future in Cambridge as we continue to push the boundaries of science to deliver life-changing medicines for patients.
There's nothing like a good corporate video, so thank you for that. So I'll come back to that video in a moment to what it means, but let me come back to some of the things, at least from a life science sector, a big pharmaceutical company's perspective of what we need to think about in terms of future inward investment. I think getting the R&D funding up to 2.4% of GDP is important, so basic research within the UK needs to continue. We've seen announcements about the Advanced Research Innovation Agency. I think that's an important way of increasing funding, but it needs to work very closely with businesses in the sector to ensure that it's matched by business interest rather than just going off on its own. So when you think about that, the other one which you'll hear a lot from our sector is technology adoption in the NHS. We're very much encouraged to do R&D in the UK. We're very much encouraged to do manufacturing in the UK. And we're being very much asked to onshore manufacturing capability into the UK. And that's all great, but if we can't then use our medicines within the UK, it becomes quite a difficult sell within the global organisations. And finally, fiscal incentives. The patent box has been a fantastic incentive to the pharmaceutical industry to stay in the UK, and will continue to be something that will be looked at. So framing that the fiscal environment will continue to be important. So they're macro UK level things. I think locally, I'd come back to that video, how do we incentivize the corridor to continue to attract life sciences? It'll apply to other sectors as well. When we moved to Cambridge, we recognized it was a special environment, an environment that we didn't want to wreck ourselves. We wanted to become part of the community, not a leech on the side of the community, drawing out all its good stuff. So we really want a place that employees want to be in. And you saw within that video, if you watch that carefully, although it was a corporate video, it was as much intended for our internal audience as our external audience, providing an environment which is sustainable, provides everyone the amenities they want, to be able to get to ground in an easy place. Because fundamentally it comes down to people. We want a very much a diverse, a very much constructive and innovative community. We want to be able to collaborate. We want to be able to share things. We want to become part of an ecosystem. We do not want to be separate from the ecosystem. So if the Innovation Corridor wants to think about what it can do most to do that, it needs to think about how we continue to access diversity, people to be able to come and go from the country. There are various other places in the UK which would call themselves life science sectors, but the proximity to London is very important for those in Cambridge. The closeness to Europe is very important, and the acceptance of people of all sorts of cultures and nationalities driving the diverse innovation we need is also very important. And perhaps we can pick up on that in the questions. I'll finish there.
Thank you very much, Andy. That's very good. And a video, a corporate video was very interesting. It has relevance to whoever's watching it. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on to our third speaker, Jason Malad, who is CEO and co-founder of Start Codon. Welcome, Jason. Thank you for joining us. Jason is a scientist, entrepreneur who is passionate about making innovative technology work better for the end user patients, patient outcomes. And I believe you're an investor in early stage life science startups, and you particularly represent incoming small businesses and getting them to scale up. So it's a pleasure to have you here, and I'll hand over to you. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you everyone for having me. It's really great to have, I think Glenn and Andy speak, because I'm going to come at it from a perspective of a budding entrepreneur that I've been myself for several years now, and some of the early stage companies that we're helping support and really drive the growth in the sector. Just give you some background from my own personal journey, which I think could put this into context. As you can tell from my accent, I'm originally from the States. I originally moved to Cambridge to do my PhD, and I've been here since 2004. So it's about 17 years that I have been, let's say, growing and building my career in the area, and definitely embracing the British lifestyle, particularly because when I first came here from the States, one of the things that I heard as a key criticism of my decision was, oh, well, you'll go there for university, but surely you're not going to stay because, all the innovations happening in America. If you want to be in the life sciences and biotech, you're going to come back to the States, right? It'll be career suicide. I have bucked that trend and have learned and embraced the fact that that's absolutely categorically false. And I think one of the things that's fundamental for us to continue to grow and expand and thrive as a sector is to really turn that on its head. Increasingly, Start Codon, the vehicle that I've set up in the last couple of years to invest in early stage companies, we're being approached now by US companies and US founders, not because they can't find capital in the States, but they recognize that being here in our ecosystem is actually the most promising and exciting place to be when it comes to biotech sectors worldwide. It's because it's a combination of having extremely strong science, a really healthy investor base, access to that capital, as well as to human capital, the wonderful talent that we have coming from the university and from the industries that exist already. All of those elements combine to make a very favorable environment, not only for homegrown companies in the UK, but also for companies and founders from abroad who want to come and live with us here. But we can't rest on our laurels. So the couple of things I want to talk about are from my own personal experiences, growing my own company and now becoming an investor. And hopefully that puts into context what I think are the advantages, but also some of the challenges that we still face. So for example, when I decided to make the UK my permanent home and grow, I recognized that in those early days, it was still relatively new for a postdoc or a student to decide to spin out a biotech company. But there was so much opportunity and support to do so. However, that being said, I recognize that now we could do so much more to be able to encourage the next generation of young entrepreneurs to take that journey. First and foremost, we do have a relative lack of senior serial entrepreneur experienced business growers who can grow and scale these early stage companies in the UK. But in my previous company, Cambridge Epigenetics, where I joined as employee number 3, I benefited from years of experienced, more gray-haired, so we say senior execs, whether it be the chair or CEOs, who mentored me and allowed me to grow into that role. So I think that is an exciting aspect of what we do, is that although there are multiple first-time CEOs and executives that are milling about and really embracing that potential, we have the opportunity to continue to support them by ensuring that those of us who have experience are bringing up the next generation. That's something that has been instrumental in my own personal career and has been really important for the companies I invest in now. The second aspect is the science. I think it's phenomenal, the quality of science that we have here in the UK, particularly from the history of Cambridge. If you think about the ecosystem between ARM and Solexa being acquired by Illumina and CAT, which became MedImmune, which is now part of AstraZeneca, we have this legacy of biologics, of genomics, of AI and machine learning, all cutting edge science that have really driven healthcare and the next stage of innovation in our healthcare worldwide. However, it doesn't mean that the science that we're producing is really getting this opportunity to shine. Too often, either we have unsavory, unfavorable terms when it comes to negotiating early stage deals, which is something we have to address with technology transfer offices as a whole across the UK, or we tend to sell too early. Now, you can debate whether or not some of those big exits that we've heard about recently or historically, like the Solexas of the world, or perhaps Kymabs, et cetera, are they success stories? I would say that they are. But was there a possibility that they might have been able to grow a bit longer, maybe a bit larger, and still have had that home in the UK where maybe they're acquiring a company overseas rather than the opposite? Not to say that those aren't successful exits or success stories, but I think as we move forward, we need to be thinking about how we can have more homegrown companies here in the UK, or companies indeed that are relocating to the UK that will grow and scale here and ultimately will be the acquirers instead of predominantly being acquired themselves. So we've talked about talent, we talked about the technology and hopefully developing it further, not having been acquired. Speaking to what Andy and Glenn said earlier, obviously there's science parks and infrastructure that's being built to try to keep at pace with the opportunities. But it's important that we can't lose sight of the fact that we also have to increase quality of life. So there's a fine balance between having the facilities for these companies to grow and scale in, as well as making sure that we don't become overcrowded or make it unpalatable for them to be able to move, or maybe even unaffordable to move to these areas. Start Code On is supported by the University of Cambridge's innovation investment arm, Cambridge Innovation Capital, by Meltwind, which is the family office of Jonathan Milner, who co-founded Abcam, one of the local area unicorn success stories. Also by the Babraham Research Campus, which is one of the world-renowned and most successful biotech research campuses. And we have backing from Genentech and Roche as a founding partner, as well as Novartis as one of the LPs in our fund. So we're very fortunate to have brought additional pharma investment and external interest into the area. We've invested in 14 companies so far, and all of them are now attracting the interest of US, European, and Asian investors as well. So I do think that we have right now, in this moment, an exciting opportunity to make sure that we have a solid foundation for the kinds of companies that I invest in to grow, and also to take advantage of the constant influx I have on a weekly basis of US investors, of Asian investors, who not only want to back companies in our region, but more importantly, they want the companies to grow and scale here. Previously, it was all about flipping to a Delaware co or those early acquisitions I mentioned earlier. But now the NEAs, the Orbimeds, the Google Ventures, the Sequoia Capitals, these heavy-hitting, well-respected companies want to invest in new cos in the UK to get access to all of the benefits we have, and more importantly, for them to grow and scale here. So I think that increasingly, not only from a policy side, but also from those of us in the private sector, and indeed in academia as well, we need to be welcoming that inward investment with open arms, but also understand the types of deals and terms that they're expecting to see to make sure that they have a warm reception. There tends to be too often a disconnect between the type of spin-out deals, for example, we do with universities for new companies here in the UK versus what is considered to be market norm overseas. So I think increasingly we're going to have a reckoning between those two, but the future is extremely bright. I have numerous companies from outside of the Cambridge region applying to my accelerator because they want to make their homes in here in the corridor between London and Cambridge, or in the Oxcam arc between Oxford and Cambridge. It's only going to increase, and I see a rapid growth in interest and spin-outs being fueled by programs such as the one I'm running and others. So all very exciting, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A session to delve a bit deeper into some of the challenges that I have posed.
Thank you very much, Jason. That was really interesting, particularly to hear, your US experience, being able to compare that to the UK experience is really interesting. But as you've heard from our three speakers, as we've said, there is a Q&A. So please put any questions for any of the speakers into the Q&A box. And we will also be asking you a question to do a poll of all of you a little bit later, which will be about conditions for effective inward investment. So be prepared for that. That will come up a little bit later. But in terms of Q&As, perhaps I can go back to Glenn. We'll do it in order of when we heard from you. Do you think there's anything we can do to improve the service of businesses which are landing? Do they need more help to help in recruitment, for example? What more can we do to help businesses?
Well, one of the things that has been said when we talk to people around the Cambridge area actually is that sometimes companies struggle to know which door to go through when they want to put a foot down in the Cambridge area in particular. And so I think we need to be able to direct the companies and support them in a more structured way. And I know that there's Cambridge And, which is being set up to support that and try and rectify that. So I'm sure that Harriet Freer may have something to say about that. But I think that will be one of the main things. It's that hand-holding process, which some areas do very well. And historically, maybe the Cambridge area hasn't had to do it so much. And probably it could benefit from doing that in a bit more of a structured way.
Thank you for that. And perhaps I could bring in Andy on a similar theme in terms of making it an easier process to land in our area and potentially embedding into local existing infrastructure and ecosystems. Is there more that we should be doing, perhaps at a local authority or a government level, for example?
Yeah, I think we're as much to blame as each other, to be honest. I think life science has grown up in Cambridge in a very villagey sort of way, and there are innumerous contacts you can make. You're never quite sure you've seen the whole. And I guess that's what we found coming into Cambridge. We were fortunate enough originally to be approached by a consortium of local councils who'd appointed a single person to talk to us. But I sit on innumerable committees and decision-making bodies, which turn out not to be decision-making bodies, just yet another consultation forum. So I think the simplicity of the interactions would make it a lot easier from a local authority perspective. What I have noticed so far is the local authorities have been very welcoming and very accommodating. But as this growth has continued, certainly within the Cambridge area, local residents are seeing more of the disbenefits of the growth in Cambridge and not so many of the benefits. And so we need to keep an eye on how we maintain that connection with the community, because it's surprising how much time I end up talking to the community directly, how much time business become politicians and politicians become businessmen. It's not such a bad thing to have those crossovers, but I think mainly if we could try and create less complexity. So it's not for me to discuss unitary authorities or different ways of working, but it is very complicated working across so many different groups with so many different purposes.
And just to follow up on that, how big an issue is housing for business space, growing businesses, and even for potential staff and skills moving to the area?
From our perspective, we've been okay, and I'll be honest, we've been okay. We've got a brand new spanking building. We're probably the highest profile company in the UK at the moment, and everybody wants to work for us. I think that's an advantage. Having said that, we're fine, and you know the answer is employees are having to live further and further away from their business location. So we say we're a Cambridge-based company, but less than 20% of our employees live in Cambridge, and it's the usual thing that the more higher paid employees can afford to live in Cambridge, and the less highly employed employees live up to an hour away, and they're the ones that end up with the higher transport costs. So it's exactly the opposite of what you'd really want. You'd want the lower paid employees to be as close as work as possible because they're often there all the time, and they should have less travel costs. So it's not quite as simple as saying, there needs to be more houses in Cambridge or anywhere. The ecosystem needs to develop. We need more sustainable transport networks. We need better links between the housing and the businesses. I don't think it's as simple to say the houses and the business have to be next to each other, but they either have to be next to each other or linked with high quality sustainable transport, because you can't have neither. You have to have one or the other.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. And perhaps I could ask Jason, just bringing back to the US-UK comparison always fascinates me, because we always feel that maybe it's better that they're far ahead in the US, but actually we have got an increasingly strong brand, haven't we, in the UK. Maybe we don't always look at we're the best to translate that R&D skill into viable business, the real business. What more could potentially government do to help us do that and scale up those businesses?
Yeah, it's a good point, Julie. I think the government's has several incredible initiatives. I mean, we've talked about Patent Box. There's the EIS and SEIS investment schemes to encourage business angels to invest in early stage companies. I think a huge part of it is that we're very humble here in the UK, and they're very braggadocious in the States. So part of it is that you can have a lot of good front in a company in the US and not much substance and get significant funding. Whereas in the UK, you have to have the substance. There has to be that quality science. There has to be an addressable unmet need that a company is actually pursuing. And this is one of the reasons why US investors are really literally beating down my door on a daily basis. I have at least one call every day with a new US VC wanting to invest in UK companies because they're sick of doing diligence in US codes and finding that there's nothing behind the curtain. That, I think, is really to the strength of the UK. Now, what we have to marry is the substance that we have with people who have the ambition to grow the companies and take them further, rather than thinking it's too risky and they have to exit. I think that's partially government being able to continue to support things like Innovate UK to provide more of a foundation for our companies to grow on. But also, I think it comes from the private sector too. So some of the VCs in the UK tend to be a bit more risk averse than they are in the States, tend to write lower check sizes, for example. So we need to have more in venture capital that's a little bit less risk averse available. I think the government has several initiatives that are actually starting to show returns. We've talked about talent acquisition as well. It is significantly harder now with Brexit, we have to be honest, but the Global Entrepreneurs Program that the Department of International Trade is running, we partner with them at StarCode on to help form a bridge for that external talent to come to the UK. So there are a lot of initiatives that are ongoing, but I would say fundamentally, the fact that we have such great substance here in our companies and our technology is what's attracting all this inward interest. Now we just have to have the leaders who can take the most of that.
That's really helpful, very interesting, thank you. A question has come in for Glenn about Harlow. We've touched on it, I think, a little bit. What would you say, Glenn, is the opportunity for Harlow, particularly with Public Health England moving in?
Yeah, I think that I didn't really touch on that part of the corridor. There's sort of Harlow, Ware, Hoddesdon. We've got Farmer on at Hoddesdon. All of that cluster around there is another emerging cluster for life sciences, manufacturing, tech. So I think there's a huge opportunity there as we see, to the point that I was making before, the sort of the spread from London and down from Cambridge, but also developing in their own right as they have their own strengths. Farmer On is looking at how it develops a cluster around itself, in particularly in companies that are wanting to benefit from its advanced research and discovery services that it can provide. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there.
I'm sure my colleague Rob Halford would absolutely agree with you. There's lots of opportunity there as well. I don't want to dominate by, I've got other questions, but I wanted to just see if Daniel Zeichner, who's my co-chair, if he has any questions, then please do feel free to pop up, Daniel, and ask a question. But I'm very interested again, and perhaps I can invite all three of you just potentially just to summarise what it is, maybe the one biggest thing that we could do as supporters and champions of the innovation corridor in our we're all got different roles to play to really create a step change in nurturing the ecosystem that we want people to buy into, that we want to get inward investment for? If that's a fair question. It's a big question, I understand. Perhaps I could ask Andy.
So you're asking Daniel or me?
Oh, sorry. Oh, Daniel, I didn't see you pop up. If you have a question, I'll let you go in first, Daniel.
Well, I don't want to break the chain, but as you've called me in, great presentations. Thank you, all of you. Just a couple of reflections. First of all, Andy, you mentioned manufacturing. Clearly, we do a lot of research and development, particularly at the Cambridge end, but much less manufacturing. What is the offer that the Innovation Corridor can make on changing that? Because quite clearly there's a strong push to move to more manufacturing. And just a second question, perhaps to the others as well. The Office for Life Sciences each year produces their competitiveness indicators report for each year. And the one that just a couple of months ago still showed that private sector investment in R&D remains within the sector quite flat. Is that the case? That's a national figure. Is that the case within the Innovation Corridor? Is it different? And if we're doing better, should we be shouting about it?
Shall I take the manufacturing question? Jason, you take the one on R&D investment, because it's a bit biased giving you the AstraZeneca answer to that. I think on manufacturing, I think it is a challenge for the Innovation Corridor. If I was to do my full rant about post-vaccine COVID, because amongst friends in the Innovation Corridor, you note the amount of investment going into Oxford around manufacturing viruses. You've seen the investment around GSK and Stevenage cell catapults. You don't see much investment further east than that as a result of what's been going on. That's interesting. What I do know at national level is we are now competing with particularly the Northwest, and we have a manufacturing plant in the Northwest, and also with Scotland in terms of manufacturing in the pharma industry. So I think there is a play we could make within the Innovation Corridor that we should be getting a greater proportion of this potential onshoring of manufacturing, but it's quite difficult within the current context of levelling up and spreading the wealth. I think R&D linked to manufacturing is a lot closer than people realise. One of the reasons we support East West Rail as part of the corridor is it will speed the sustainable link between Manchester and Cambridge. It's one of those sort of indirect benefits. It's very important. We have R&D scientists based in the Northwest at our manufacturing plant. So there was an inexorable link, but I don't think we've really made that argument particularly well within the Innovation Corridor at the moment.
So maybe I'll say, oh, sorry, Julie, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jason.
No, I think there was a second question around kind of private investment in the R&D sector as a whole. I think that we are better than most, definitely. We could always improve, but from my personal experience, I see multiple, whether they be SMEs or if there are some of the larger corporates who have public-private partnerships that they set up across the Innovation Corridor. For example, StarCodon, my accelerator, is based in the Milner Therapeutics Institute, and there are, at last count, over 100 different biotech companies supporting this academic research department in the University of Cambridge as a bridge between the university to connect those researchers to sources of funding and partnership deals with over 100, as I said, biotechs and 10 consortium pharma members, including AstraZeneca, Pfizer, GSK, Johnson & Johnson, and you name it. And I think it's a really innovative model of how you can bring those public-private partnerships together, and particularly bring in more resources from the private sector to supporting research, not only in the university, but also in the SMEs and other biotechs in the region. So it could always be better. I think we should be a roadmap for the rest of the country. And one of the things that we do at StarCodon is help increase access for the rest of the UK to the funding and innovation that's happening in the corridor as well. I think that's an important aspect of making sure that the entirety of the UK can be elevated off of the back of what's happening that's so exciting in our own backyard.
Thank you very much, Jason. Oh, Glenn.
I'll jump in as well. With regard to, you also mentioned, Daniel, shouting about it. And that's not something that I think Cambridge is particularly good at. So actually not as good as Oxford, and not maybe as coordinated, and doesn't have the same sort of the front man that Oxford has got in the form of John Bell. And we need to think about that and how that message can get across in a much more coordinated way. And to the question around manufacturing and so on, you need to be at the table having those conversations in order to get access to the investments into manufacturing. And I'm not certain that that's happening at the moment.
Thank you. Glenn, just while you're there, we've had a question come in about the impact of COVID. The question relates to how COVID has changed the real estate offer, but it might be a good question to just say how COVID has impacted everything really, in terms of how it's impacted inward investment and what we need, which comes back to the question I was going to ask really is, you know, what are the big things that we can do to really supercharge the inward investment into our area, because we're all champions of the innovation corridor. So what is it that we can do that's going to make the biggest difference?
Mm-hmm. So I can talk about the impact of COVID, firstly on the life sciences sector, from a real estate perspective, actually, which is where there's an awful lot of potential inward investment. So since COVID arrived, but it was happening beforehand, but in the real estate sector, there has been an awakening of life sciences, and the arrival of COVID has simply supercharged it. So we estimate that there's about £15 billion worth of capital looking to find a home in UK life sciences sector. And an awful lot of that is looking around the Cambridge area. And so it's about ensuring that those assets are available for people to invest in. The new developments are freed up. You know, there's some great sites around at Cambridge Biomedical Campus and other Cambridge North and other parts of the city, and then spreading off down towards Stevenage and Hoddesdon, as we've already talked about. So we've got to get the planning sorted out. We've got to make it available, the sites available, because the money is there to invest and it's looking for a home. And COVID has just supercharged it, because when real estate investors look at their portfolios, they see lab users as people who need to go into the office or need to go into the lab, as opposed to the ability to work from home. And so those companies are much more sustainable as occupiers of this real estate. So that's the thing we need to do. Make sure we're clearing the way from planning, make sure we're making the opportunities available for all this money to invest in.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go back to Jason about a question that has come in. You said that foreign investors are keen for their investments to grow and stay in the UK. What has changed here, and why are investors so keen on the UK specifically?
So I think it's been a couple of important things, actually. I think that Brexit highlighted to them that there might be, let's say, less of a close tie to Europe in a way, and so that they thought that was an opportunity. I think historically they've always known that there are great scientists and great companies in the UK, but they've always wanted to invest in their own neighborhoods. And ironically, with COVID happening, because we're all on video and we're all on Zoom and we're all on Teams all the time, a lot of the investors in the States have told me that they're no longer so reluctant to invest in companies that aren't down the road from them. It doesn't matter if if you can't see a company that's next door, if you can see a company that's overseas, as long as you can join the Zoom for the board meeting, you're there. And so they're now starting to get much more comfortable with the idea that, okay, it'd be better for the company to grow and scale where it has more affordable facilities, more affordable human capital, because hiring people like bioinformaticians, which are gold dust these days for companies, pretty much every biotech company needs some kind of informatician. You have the talent here and they're far more affordable than if you go to the Bay Area or Boston. So all these things start to come together and they think the science is incredible, it's easier to acquire the talent, there's room for facilities to grow, their hurdles for time zones and proximity have been reduced, and they also see that there's an opportunity perhaps that maybe if European capital is taking a step away, that there's a vacuum that they can fill. So all these things I think are coming together to increase the appetite for investing and backing companies here. And we've had examples of SMEs that have grown and been very successful here already. without having to necessarily be acquired by that larger American corporate. And they think that's very, I think all those elements coming together makes it a very attractive proposition to invest in the UK companies.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm very impressed. I've just been very pleased that the UK government has launched the Office for Investment, which is specifically designed to attract foreign direct investment. I wondered, and I raised the question at the time to the ministers, I'd be interested to hear your views, Jason, whether we should have an Office for Investment which focuses on UK investment, not just foreign direct investment, but investment into the UK from the UK, and exploring how we could get more funds into the venture and the scale up the whole sector. I mean, do you think that might add additional focus from the government?
I think it can. It'd be great to have that support. I mean, you know, initiatives like Innovate UK have been fundamental to get the science ready, but the investment piece, it's the amount of capital, and also it comes back to the risk appetite I said earlier. So if government could step in and just lower even more hurdles for encouraging private sector investment, for having more government backing for these early stage innovations, I think it's going to be a win. I've witnessed personally how the companies that I've invested in have benefited from that. I also know several funds that have been helped by the British Business Bank to get off the ground as well. So any more initiatives like that can only be positive in my opinion.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I mean, I'm going to start going to the poll, but I don't want anyone to leave anything on the pitch. If there's anything you'd like to add, Jason, Andy, Glenn, then please dive in, because I'm going to go and I'm going to ask about the poll in a few seconds. So no, so perhaps we could have the poll. It's an exciting thing. It's going to have some options on what we think are the 3 most important conditions for effective inward investment in the innovation corridor. I'm sure you don't need me to, but just to run through is quality of life. They're fascinating characteristics actually. Quality of life, highly competitive industrial and commercial property, transport links, digital infrastructure, public and private sector collaboration, which is a really interesting one, and access to world-class talent. So please submit your 3 most important conditions. Well, that's really interesting. Let's have a look. 84% have access to world-class talent. And I think, you know, there was a reference to what the government, for example, in terms of visas and attracting those skills from across the world can have. And several other very high quality of life, highly competitive industrial commercial property, which I think we touched on in that discussion, and public and private sector collaboration. I mean, they're all very relatively evenly spread, apart from almost everyone agreeing on world-class talent in there, which I guess goes to speak to the fact that there's lots of very many different strands to this to attract inward investment, and that we all need to be very alive to the piece across the board. I mean, Andy, would you like to comment on those results of that poll? Is there anything in there that surprises you?
I would just say I was surprised access to world-class talent wasn't even higher. Because that's what it's all about.
And I would also say that the first 2 are basically about talent, because quality of life is important in attracting world-class talent. So it's all the same thing, I think.
Thank you, Jason. What did you think about the results of that? I think you're right. They're so symbiotic. They all have an interplay with each other, don't they?
They really do. And you know, the 3 that I voted for were access to world-class talent, quality of life, and public and private sector collaboration, because I really do feel that there's an attitude that we have here where sometimes we feel that ecosystems are competing with each other in the UK, when in fact it's the UK competing on a global scale. So the more connections we can have within the Golden Triangle and across the UK, the better, particularly when it comes to sharing the wealth with some of the public-private partnerships that we benefit from in the innovation corridor.
Thank you very much. I mean, I'd like to thank all three of our panelists. It's been absolutely fascinating. I'm very conscious that the time has absolutely flown by, which just goes to show how very interesting it is. I mean, from my point of view, as a relatively new MP, I'm not in one of those three centres that Glenn outlined to start with, but actually it can benefit every area of the innovation corridor. So I think it's so important to me as an MP and to be able to offer this kind of skills and opportunities to my constituents. It's so important. I mean, I've always said that it's not going to be banks, it's not going to be oil companies that are they're going to be the dominating factor of the FTSE 250 in the next 100 years. It's going to be the companies we haven't even heard of, the companies that are growing, that are disrupting now. So what we can do to foster their thriving, and particularly in our area, will be so important. We're almost like the groundsman. I've used this analogy as well. If we're looking at a game of cricket, we're the groundsman that needs to prepare the pitch to let everyone play their best game, and I'm sure that we're playing our part. And if anyone else would like to get involved in the innovation corridor, engage with the innovation corridor, publicise what we're doing and what more we can do, then obviously you're already supporters and we're very grateful, but keep championing our area and our innovation corridor, because I know it's going to go from strength to strength. So thank you to our speakers. Thank you very much to everyone at the innovation corridor for arranging today. And thank you everyone for attending. Very much appreciated.